Picardy 5 and studied French and German at Aberdeen University and theatre studies at University College Cardiff. He previously worked at the Scottish Poetry Library as a field worker and assistant director, but has worked as a freelance writer, translator, editor, and writing tutor since 2004. That he has been able to make a living in that way says a great deal about the quality of his work in every respect, and also about his communicative and collaborative capacities. And I'll explain that. I can vouch not only for the work, of which I've been a fan for some years now, since coming across his exhibition at the Wordsworth Trust in 2014, and that was called Walking Poets, Wordsworth and Basho. But he also has a rare ability to create a joyous atmosphere amongst those with whom he works. I first met Ken in 2015 when we were both resident at Hawthornden Castle in Scotland, translation fellows, with a small group of selected literary translators. Ken helped to make every evening of the retreat into informal workshops and reading sessions. And even more importantly, he introduced his fellow translator poets to a number of wonderful word games. So going back to the more formal stuff, Ken's first collection of poems, Souvenirs and Homelands, was shortlisted for a Saltire Award in 1998. And a collection of his translations of contemporary German poets, Feathers and Lime, was published in 2007, as was a new collection of poems, On the Flyleaf. Since these early successes, he has published several books of collaborative work, often with visual media artists, and a new collection, Floating the Woods, which was published in 2018 by Loeth Press. Two collections of poems by the German poet Arno Rautenberg have also been published in Ken's translation, as well as Heroines from Abroad, translation of poems by the German poet Christina Marenborn, published by Carcanet in 2018. Ken's own poems have been published in translation in French, German, Hungarian, and Slovakian. As an editor, he has worked on various anthologies, and as a creative writing tutor, he has run poetry sessions and writing workshops for children and adults in a wide range of settings, including schools, libraries, prisons, care homes, gardens, beaches, and woodland. He is read at venues and festivals across the UK and abroad, including in Bratislava, Slovakia, in Edinburgh at the International Book Festival, at Poetry International London, at a festival called Planten and Blumen in Hamburg, Germany, at the Stanza Festival in St Andrews, at the Wordsworth Trust, and Festival International de Poésie Trois-Rivières in Canada. And now is reading and talking to us on the intriguing topic of The Tide Slides Backward. Dear audience, wherever in the world you are listening to or watching this, please welcome Ken Cockburn. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Antoinette, for that very warm, very comprehensive introduction. It was lovely to be reminded of those evenings at Hawthornden Castle. I'd forgotten the games nights, as it were. They were great fun. So thank you to the Norman Nicholson Society for the invitation to speak this afternoon. I don't know Millom, and I'm sorry not to be there to discover it and get a sense of how the place links to the poems. That's one of the things I want to look at this afternoon, place and poem. Reading Nicholson's poems, even so, I feel quite at home in them. Not the specifics, but the way he writes about many aspects of the world. Family, place, geology, botany, shorelines and coastlines, horizons, empty and busy with islands. I've titled the talk, The Tide Slides Backwards, which is a line from the poem Landing on Staffa, which I'll consider later. And I chose that phrase as it sums up for me two key elements of Nicholson's work. Careful observation of natural phenomena, but a sense of time slipping so that events from the past can be experienced as vividly as those in the present. The poems allow us to sense our place within the slow movements of the landscape, rivers, scree, the growth and decline of forests, movements lasting far longer than a human lifespan. I want to think about how we can come to know a place, and if and how our experience of place can be influenced by an understanding of its past, and how we can make a home for ourselves in a changing world. I've selected 5 poems by Nicholson, which I'll read, and a selection of my own poetry. And I've also got some images that I'll show you. So I'll kind of jump in and out of screen share as we go along. I wanted to start by offering something of the scenes that I grew up among in Kirkcaldy, a town of about 50,000 inhabitants on the south coast of Fife. From most of that coast, the opposite shore of the Firth of Forth is visible. That's Edinburgh and the farming country of East Lothian. But Kirkcaldy lies on a stretch of coast facing east rather than south. So the view from there is an empty horizon. And I wanted to start with Nicholson's poem, An Absence of Islands, whose opening lines links his view with mine. This is from the collection, a local habitation. An absence of islands. Look west from Cumberland, east from the North Sea shore, where the wind is a spume of tossed terns and fulmars, or fumes with smothering feathers of soot. Look beyond seaweed and sewage, pebbles and quicksand and the oiled ebb channel, and always at the far rim of the sea's grooved disk, whatever the direction, whatever the slide of tide, in an absence of islands, the horizon seems the same. So I felt there was a lot I recognized there, a lot that made me feel at home. I was very struck as well by his line about the sea's grooved disk, and that idea that what you're looking at is not emptiness, but there's content there, specifically sound, as if the surface of the sea can be played like a record. Just going to go into screen share now and show a couple of images. Sorry. This is the first one. I just wanted to show you a map of Kirkcaldy. As I said, his description of the landscape he grew up in is quite familiar in that poem, the seabirds particularly. When I was younger, there was heavy industry in Kirkcaldy by way of a coal mine at Seafield on the southern edge rather of Kirkcaldy, now replaced by a housing estate. You'd see on the map Long Craig, that rock just offshore. The mine was just inland from there. Unlike Nicholson, however, rather than feeling rooted, I dreamt of escape. And when I write about Kirkcaldy, it tends to be in terms of departure. And the first poem I'll read comes from a sequence of flyleaf poems written about books of different types that I encountered at different stages of my life. When I was 9 or 10, I discovered Marvel comics and read them avidly for a time. And one of my favorite characters was Prince Namor, the Submariner. And I'm going to read this poem because it picks up on various themes in Nicholson's work. Childhood, the loss of industry, the disappearance of an industrial landscape, the tone of loss and restoration that are in many of his poems, and the lasting effects that transient industries can have on a town and on a place. So this is on the flyleaf of Submariner, number 36, circa 1971. Once at Easter, or maybe autumn, with the railway line on my right, and on my left, the flat silver grey of the Firth. I walked past Stark's Park and the Teal Burn, across the Ochtertool Road, almost as far as the Colliery Gates, the road running on till it twisted under the railway bridge and uphill, to the paper shop, which I'd found stocked everything. Captain Marvel, Iron Man, Doctor Doom, the Daredevil, the Avengers and the X-Men, occasional villains who'd been transformed into titular, if flawed heroes, mutants whose power derived as likely as not from an accident in the lab, a touch of the Jekyll's about most of them, and which, whatever it enabled them to achieve, removed them from the everyday ground. And there were those of mythical stock, like Atlantean Namor the Submariner, whose real source of power, whatever superhuman strength he had accrued, lay in his uncontrollable rage. And though I don't remember much of the story, I remember that when he found at the end of number 36 his wife fatally injured, and at the start of number 37 his wife untransformably dead, I understood, whether or not she'd appear in the odd flashback, neither willpower nor weird science would resurrect her. Now, passing through on the train, no shop to be seen and the pit long since closed, I imagine the abandoned tunnels that run for miles beneath the seabed and think how deceptively easy it was in the end to leave, and that however you try to return, willpower or weird science, the scene's as altered as was, say, the original Doctor Strange from his later redrawn self. And I'll read another poem set on that coast, but a little further west, where Edinburgh is visible. This is St. Bridget's Chapel, a ruin lying between Aberdour and Dalgetty Bay, looking over to Edinburgh. This poem was written about 20 years ago when my kids were young and we were living in Edinburgh. So I had become more used to looking north to Fife rather than south to Lothian. View of Edinburgh from Fife. We begin to keep faith with our ruins. Mid-October, sun silvering the Firth, sweetness of berries and the still green trees parting for the old chapel and graveyard. Angels and the bones memento mori, time worn on the lichen patterned tombstones the kids play among. On the tidy grass, a single yellow dandelion shines. This shore, sea to the south, I grew up on, but having crossed, it took years to adapt, reading in the opposite direction, as if Edinburgh were, say, Urdu. From the beach, the bridges are on our right, that is, west, while the east opens on a space of the imagination we fly or go overland to forget. The city's a metallic silhouette, so approachable, the water so calm. My daughter says, really, as if we could, let's jump in a rowing boat and go home. And I just want to finish this section by considering the view that ends Nicholson's poem. In an absence of islands, the horizon seems the same. Just going to come back. And I'm going to go back in time almost 250 years to 1773, when James Boswell and Samuel Johnson undertook their tour to the Hebrides. They stayed briefly with Lord Errol at Slains Castle on the coast just north of Aberdeen, And when they looked out at that absence of islands, they didn't see the same thing. Boswell saw opportunity, perhaps a chance to do some social climbing, while Johnson sees spectacle and danger. Boswell wrote, "The house is built quite upon the shore. The windows look upon the main ocean, and the King of Denmark is Lord Earl's nearest neighbour on the northeast." Johnson, "From the windows, the eye wanders over the sea that separates Scotland from Norway, and when the winds beat with violence, must enjoy all the terrific grandeur of the tempestuous ocean." In terms of geographical accuracy, Denmark or Norway, they're both right in that they were about level with the Skagerrak, which is the sea between Denmark and Norway. And this, I want to read a new poem reflecting on their journey up the east coast of Scotland, which for Johnson is something of a non-place, indicated by a pun on Leith, the name of Edinburgh's river, and Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. And it was really reading Nicholson's poem and that line about the horizon seeming the same that prompted me to write this earlier this year. The poem's called Horizon. Samuel Johnson travels from Edinburgh to Inverness, August 1773. Crossing the water of Leith, or Lethe, as punned by Mr. Nairn, he finds himself as if translated to a realm of ghosts, all but treeless, without variety of sun and shade, the hedges made of stone, the islands unpopulated, the past a half-world of fragments and absences, ruins and forgetfulness, and always the blank horizon threatening a storm from which Horatian verse will shelter him, he hopes. There are detours, an outing to the Buller where a walking spirit might, he thinks, be held, before they must traverse the open moor where Banquo and Macbeth found in their way the weird sisters. They pass and come to Nairn, on which he wastes few words, and yet it's here enchantment starts to fail. A girl is spinning wool with a great wheel and singing in a language new to them. That same day, the map of Scotland is laid before him and a route devised to Skye and Mull and all the lesser isles, whose shifting clouds of possibility will complicate the horizontal view. And we'll return to some of those islands later. The next poem of Nicholson's I want to consider is quite a short one. It's called The Megaliths, taken from the early selected poems. I'm not sure exactly when it was written. So he's considering standing stones that still dot the British landscape, certainly in Scotland, and I know also in many parts of England and Wales. The megaliths, excuse me. Heedless, unheeded of the years they stand. The rain drips off their chins, and lichens spread a moist green skin along each stony hand that gropes among the bones of the grey dead. They did not see the forests flow and fall, junipers blue wave by the fell-side shore, nor barley batten by the codling wall, nor purple ploughland swipe across the moor. They hold death in them. Skulls have moulded ears that deaf remain to curlew, crow, and dove. The human winds blow past them. Each one fears the hoarded ache of a malignant love. It feels quite a pessimistic poem. The stones are repositories of death, blind to life around them. The human winds blow by them. The dead stone is contrasted with the colours and sounds of life, and it seems that their main function is to stand in contrast to the change that goes on around them. Those stones are static, in contrast to those in another poem, Wall, the celebration of a dry stone wall. That's a structure which shifts with time, which works with rather than against the landscape. But that poem of Nicholson's made me think of two poems that I'd written about stones in the landscape, and I'll show you images of those next. So we'll move on to this. This is Shandwick, the Shandwick stone. Can be found in Easter Ross overlooking the Murray Firth north of Inverness. And it's an example of what are called Pictish stones, more recent than Nicholson's megaliths. And as you can see, they're carved with elaborate figures, objects, and patterns. These stones dot the landscapes of eastern Scotland and were created between about 600 and 1000 AD. We can think of them as a repository of memory, or perhaps of lost knowledge, because today we have no idea what they mean. In the poem, I see the stone as a semi-permanent witness to change. Shandwick stone. As jets without the black box of memory startle sheep in deserted glens, the stone hunters stalk their various prey. Chaotic and recurrent as the tides, incised patterns swirl beneath them. The Pictish beast, that composite bird, fish, mammal, harbours a smile, having already weathered eras and elements untraceable by radar. The rain clouds gather above an unyielding sea. Wildflowers and seeding grasses rustle in anticipation of the next downpour. And the next poem is about Orkney. I've got a series of images to show you. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. But Orkney, my experience of Orkney was as a place where past and present mingle in a kind of equilibrium. And the future is included too, given the island's involvement in the development of renewable energy. And although today they might seem remote when viewed from London or even Edinburgh, they have been central at different historical periods. A travel hub between Scandinavia and the west coast of Britain and Ireland for travellers in the Neolithic age, when structures like the Ring of Brodgar arose. And again for the Vikings, who left their graffiti within Maes Howe, an ancient chambered cairn. Perhaps again with the melting of the Arctic ice and new trade routes opening up north of Russia, they will again be considered central. The poem is in 4 stanzas, and for each of these, I'll show an image by the artist Kat Outram, made for an exhibition at Edinburgh Printmakers Workshop a few years ago, which linked poets and printmakers. The poem and the images try to capture different aspects of the islands. This first one is sea, and then shore, the past, and farming. Orkney. We sail past Stroma's empty fields. The maidens grind the sea god's salt. Binoculars to scan the scene, the latent power the races hold. Divers down among the wrecks. I don't know what it is I've found. A har drifts in across the rocks. The crab's blue shell fades in the sun. The Romans came and saw and left. Vikings named themselves in runes. A horde of shards the dig unearthed. The sacred grove is made of stone. Unfurl your banner to the breeze. Starlings wheel across the sky. A spotted orchid in the verge. The wind is in the blades and flags. Orkney was settled by the Vikings, and the dialect spoken there still has traces of their language, which this next poem of Nicholson's also refers to. Cornthwaite considers the connection of people and landscape and how that continues over time. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, thwaite comes from the Old Norse thwaite or thwaite, meaning a piece of land or a paddock, literally a cutting or a cut piece. Relating to Old English thwitten, meaning to cut off, a piece of ground, especially a piece of wild ground, cleared from forest or reclaimed for arable, which is the meaning it's used in the poem. This is Nicholson's Cornthwaite. Cornthwaite, the clearing of the corn, my mother's maiden name, whose umpteenth great-grandfather, off come from a northern voe, hacked thorn, oak scrub, and birch from rake and beck bank to sow his peck of oats, not much of a crop. Lish as a wind-racked larch, he took his trod through landscape, nameless still to him, until, remembering his own grandfather's talk of twait and dal and fjell, he scratched those words on the rocks, naming the Cymric coombs in a Norse tongue. The land then named him back, and here, a millennium later, my baptismal card clacks echoes of a clearing beneath cracked granite and black pines, where the migrant fieldfare breeds, and the ungregarious, one-flowered cloudberry is commoner than crowding bramble. Now, in my own day's dale, under the slant scree of unstable time, I lop, chop, and billhook at thickets and rankness of speech, straining to let light in, make space for a word, to hack out once again my inherited thwaite, and sow my peck of poems, not much of a crop. More often than not, the original meaning of a place name is opaque to us. At one level, it doesn't matter. Glasgow is a city in the west of Scotland, and if its name comes from the Gaelic glas gu, green place, that doesn't help us when we see the word on a road sign or hear it on the news. But as Cornthwaite shows us, understanding the meaning of a place name, or indeed a family name, is an act of recovery, recovering a sense of what the place meant to those who named it, and offering ways we can consider the place and our own relationship to it in the present. To go off at a slight tangent, I remember the most valuable Marvel comics were those which told the origin stories of the characters, how the heroes had acquired their powers, a kind of recognition of the value of going back to the source as a way of understanding more deeply the thing we know in its present form. This is a poem reflecting on opacity and transparency with regard to place names. It refers to Timothy Pont and William Roy, who were two early mappers of Scotland. before GPS and zoomable maps, before trig points, OS and contour lines, before Timothy Pont and William Roy. Transparent, descriptive, everyday words mapped the territory from here to there and the debatable lands in between. Gave measure to local habitation with invitations and invocations, memories, curses, sightings, and warnings, marking the familiar and recurrent, the exceptional and unexpected, the haunts of violence, the shock of flight, until words, smoothed and blurred by many tongues, became names as inevitably and opaquely themselves as clouds or pebbles. Most Scottish place names are derived from languages either no longer spoken at all or with few contemporary speakers: Brythonic, Latin, Norse, Gaelic. And I'll read a couple of poems from a sequence written about the River Ness. The first one goes back to its linguistic source, though this has become clouded with time. So, Ness. Rivers hold the oldest names. We have the word, but lack its sense. Ness might mean now or headland, a murmuring of running water, lake of the falls, the name of a goddess, or just a lost tongue's word for river. The River Ness has a vast catchment area. Everything that flows into Loch Ness eventually feeds it, and nearly all of those waters are named in Gaelic, still a living language, but with far fewer speakers than even 100 years ago. And this next poem takes the names of some of the smaller lochs around Loch Ness and plays with their meanings, sometimes obliquely and sometimes more directly. I'm attempting a kind of linguistic archaeology, seeking out shards of meaning relating to land use and culture. Chorus the dawn at Loch Nanoin, silver glitters Loch Nanlan. The berries ripen at Loch Nanoirigan, the snail's defences at Loch Duntelchig, grinding the grains at Loch Nambrahan, pass between summits at Loch of Yallich. The climb is steep from Loch Mastak, the grey breath of Loch Leith. And the next poem stays with Gaelic place names, but here they're found on the island of Jura, just off the coast of Kintyre. And it uses place names to conjure images of people living in a landscape that is now more or less uninhabited. And each verse features a place name featuring colour from around Loch Tarbert, extended by material from Maclennan's Gaelic English Dictionary relating to the colour word. So for example, the Gaelic word ban means white in landscape terms, but it's also the word used to describe fair hair and unploughed land. It's from a sequence of poems called Glenbadrig. I'll just mention as well, the boys in the last verse are things floating at sea rather than young men. Above Inyach Ban, a fair-haired girl treads untilled slopes. Scarcely spring at Leith Doir, old greybeard dreams of sea trout and mugwort ale. After sheltering in Uav Jerig, two men with bloodshot eyes emerge, sworn enemies. The end of a lamentable day. Night inks the sky over island dew. Thankful for boys and buttercups at Rua Buoy. I've been talking about the way words can help us better understand a place. Many places we visit, especially when we are tourists, we'll already have some knowledge of through literature, but Nicholson's poem, Landing on Staffa, questions the value of seeing somewhere through a literary viewfinder. I'll just bring up a picture of Staffa. It's a small island just not far off Mull. And Nicholson's experience of visiting was spoiled for him by the descriptions of others. He writes, the air is blurred by words. Quick eyes are dimmed by a cataract of known experience. Sorry, I'll say that again. The air is blurred by words. Quick eyes are dimmed by a cataract of known appearances. And when he tries to describe the island himself, he manages only what he calls knick-knack conceits. This is one of the reasons he gives for his difficulty. These familiar words, but familiar images of the island as well. It was visited by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. So these engravings were very, very popular. He manages 8 lines of unencumbered, unself-conscious description of the islands nearby, but then he pictures himself scurrying south back to more familiar scenes he prizes for their plainness. Streets, pavements, schoolyards, railings, allotments, all of which he can see directly, unspoiled, as Staffa was, by the describers. Yet he realizes the irony of his own ambition. He yearns to find just one single stone that must have lain for ages undescribed, and then describe it. So, is writing about a place a way of claiming and enclosing it? Does a description block appreciation by others? I don't think Nicholson is seriously suggesting that. The poem is more self-deprecating than despairing, and Staffa is perhaps a special case, still remarkable despite all the attention it has received. But I think Nicholson is right about stones, which don't need the scale and drama of Staffa to be powerful. Let's return to Jura. It's a view of Loch Tarbert on the west coast of Jura. And what you can see in the, just to the left of the center of that image is a raised beach, long since beyond the reach of the tide, but it's sterile, so it remains uncolonized by plants. There's a closer view of it. There's a number of these scattered across that landscape there. And I'm going to read a poem inspired really by visiting this place. It also takes as its starting point another poem, Hugh McDermott's On a Raised Beach, taken from his collection Stony Limits in 1934. And the poem is called Stones from a Raised Beach. And there's a detail of some individual stones. Stones from a raised beach. This stone is a song from the beginning of the world. This stone drones a ground bass. This stone is a gate, always open, always opaque. This stone is prelapsarian. This stone is unmoved by the moon. This stone is at the peak of its powers. This stone might fell a Goliath. This stone has outlasted empires and languages. This stone has dismissed evolution. This stone is silent. This stone is a star. This stone goes straight to God. This stone is a song for the end of the world. Rather than blurring, writing can draw our attention to what we might otherwise overlook or take for granted. In the collection, Sea to the West, the poem that follows Landing on Staffa is Glenorchy. And in it, Nicholson is able to let the place be itself while making space within it for his own concerns. Glenorchy, Sunday, late summer, 1968. Mull and Iona behind me, and 11 days of highland brightness. Loch Awe electroplated, Ben Cruachan chiselled and faceted like cut glass in a cubic clarity of air. The river of Orchy, subterranean almost, glittering below hollowed and pendant shelves of sandy stone. And everywhere, down crag and brae, a tumbling and cataract of yellowing green, birch and rowan, leaf and berry, and the churned froth of heather. Then, passing through the village at the foot of the glen, I stop at a shop with newspapers for sale and take one, glancing for the cricket scores. When, like a snapped spring, a familiar name headlines clean at me. Millom Ironworks to close in 4 weeks' time. And now, whenever I remember Glenorchy, I see the stretch of light, the waterfalling seasons, and 10,000 years of after Ice Age weathering crash on an arras wood of smokeless furnace chimneys, and, blundering among the dead trunks, 500 men at one stroke out of work. So Nicholson reads that place, Glenorchy, in a very particular, very personal way. He now associates the landscape with the closure of the Millom Ironworks. And I suppose I'm doing something similar with Seafield Colliery and the Submariner. I want to read next a poem from the Road North, which employs this type of association in an intended rather than a chance fashion. So a text essentially unrelated to the place with which it is associated, but chosen to go with it. I'll go back to screen share again. So The Road North is a long poem I wrote with Alec Finlay about a journey we made around Scotland when we took as our guide the Japanese poet Basho's Oku no Hosomichi, a book translated as Narrow Road to the Deep North or Back Roads to Far Towns, which describes a journey made by Basho and his friend Sora in 1689 around the northern part of the island of Honshu. His book is in 53 sections, and for each of those, we chose a site in Scotland, a mountain for a mountain, a castle for a castle, a harbour for a harbour, and so on. Our aim was to see our own country afresh, to clear what has become over time blurred with words. So on the left, there's a short extract from the blog. For each of our 53 sites, we also chose a tea for Japan and the East and a whiskey for Scotland. The photograph is taken at Dunskeich on Skye, where we met the poet Meg Bateman, who happened to have visited Japan not long before. And Dunskeich is thought to be the fortress mentioned in an early part of the old Irish epic, the Táin, where the young Cuchulainn is trained in swordsmanship by the great warrior queen Skeich. Enjoying her role as Basho's innkeeper, Meg prepared our picnic, chose today's whiskey, an Isla Bruichladdich, a suitable tea for a warrioress, Kimun Black Tiger, and brought with her 3 sake cups from Japan. The shopkeeper threw them in when he dropped and slightly damaged a shell dragon Colum wanted. A happy accident. The joy of that tour was so many happy accidents that came about when we used that viewfinder of Basho to ask questions, to make requests of people that we came across. The other image there, it's the cover of the book, the poem, The Road North. And the image that you can see there is a photograph taken by a Japanese artist, Tomohiko Ogawa. And he took that photograph in Japan. That's his hand holding a postcard that Alex sent him from Scotland. The postcard shows a coast near Ullapool. So he's laying a Scottish landscape over a Japanese one and trying to find a sweet spot, if you like, where they meet. The poem I'll read is our poem about Basho's Shirakawa, a mountain pass that separates Edo, the old name for Tokyo, and which signifies city culture more generally, and Oku, the deep north, the back towns, the highlands, the sticks. We connected Shirakawa not with a single place, but with the Highland line, where the hills rise and English and Scots give way to Gaelic. Anticipation each day mounting. We were guided towards Shirakawa through green Perthshire glens. If you're travelling in the North Country Fair, where the wind hangs heavy on the borderline, people ask us the way to the Shirakawa barrier, and we reply, take it easy. The Shirakawa barrier is everywhere. The map's watershed is Shirakawa, reading the names of burns running southeast, Alps flowing northwest. Lovers' beaches, gully-carved hearts and initials are Shirakawa, an intimacy between settlement and elsewhere. Comrie's confluence of Leadnock, Erne and Ruchel is Shirakawa. Edo to the east in the orderly market town, Oku to the west in twilit deer, pheasants lacking road sense, tumble-down gardens and close-ranked pines. Any wee road where your fingers brush meadowsweet verges is Shirakawa, when you let the wheel turn through the glen with all your attention on the encounters and minor dramas of passing places. Any one-street village with shops stocking fancy goods and a butcher's that sells a new brand of oatcakes is Shirakawa. Any clicked latch of a gate that makes a space for things to come is Shirakawa. And it was an odd paradox, but reading those Scottish landscapes through that Japanese text created in me a strong sense of understanding and belonging. And I feel too that Nicholson felt some sense of belonging in the place where he heard such startling news. Nicholson's experience of Staffa notwithstanding, I'm receptive to the idea that writing can open us to a place. I think that is probably the effect of Nicholson's own writing on visitors to Millom and Cumbria more generally. And certainly I feel my experience of Edinburgh, a city about which a great deal has been written, has been enhanced by the views offered by previous writers, a chance to see beyond or beneath the sometimes overpowering dazzle of the present day. And I want to finish with a short poem set in Edinburgh's Old Town, written 25 years ago when my older daughter was 4. And it shares with Nicholson's work something of the sense that he has of substance and transience. This place long existed before we were here and will remain long after we've gone, but just as it helps shape us, so we help to shape it. You might need to, I'm going to show a little film of me reading a poem in this place. You might need to turn up the volume a little bit for it. I'll just mention one thing about the poem. It's set in Fleshmarket Close. And when I wrote the poem, the lower part of the close, one of the walls belonged to a building where the Scotsman newspaper was published, although it has since moved. The bus is due, all right, but keeps us waiting. The utter narrowness of Fleshmarket Close slopes away behind us. The ghosts of butchers faint amid newspaper men, fanatics of now. My daughter races down it. At the foot, a silhouette against the buzz and flicker of the street. She lingers for a moment. A single step could snap this contact line. She shouts I'm not to move and runs towards me. Then soon the bus arrives. We move across the junction of the old and new towns where the airy bridges touch the high street rock. So, yeah, I just wanted to finish with giving a sense of a real place. We're so used to doing things on Zoom. It's nice to get the impression of bricks and mortar, as it were. And yeah, let's hope we're gradually moving towards the possibility of experiencing poems in places, in live places again. So thank you very much for listening. That's the end of my presentation.
I'm sure you'll agree that that was a wonderful talk and reading by Ken, but completely intermingled his inspiration with Nicholson's inspiration. You can see that they're soulmates across a long period of time. I thought there was so much that was paralleling Ken's work to Nicholson's work. And I hope that we'll be able to meet Ken again in person in Millom at some point, because it would be lovely to show him the landscape. I'll pass that message on to him if he returns, or by email. So we now have a break until 25 past, when Charlie will be speaking about the Trails app. So hope to see you then, everybody. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.